Hey guys, imagine waking up at dawn to the crowing rooster, except your rooster is probably too hungover from last night's mead binge to actually crow. So you lie in a stinky straw mattress, listening to your neighbor's pig snort in your face, and you realize today's festival is going to be an absolute madhouse of questionable hygiene and calorie-loaded chaos. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. The dawn of a medieval festival started not with birdsong or church bells, but with your mother banging a ladle on a pot so loud you almost believe it's the Last Judgment. You scramble out of bed, limbs complaining like an old knight's armor creaking in the rain. Your clothes are smeared with last week's slop, flecked with straw, and have the familiar aroma of cereal renewer, because who had the time or water to wash? By the time you stumble into the village green, the scene looks like a traveling circus collided with a barnyard riot. It's early, but somehow the local ale brewer's tent is already crowded. Your neighbor Bertha is slurping down festival wine, which is just watered-down vinegar spiced with something that might be juniper, or might be a pine needle from last season. She winks at you through bleary eyes and chugs another cup. You wonder why you ever thought moderation was a medieval virtue. The marketplace stalls are set up in an improvised semicircle around the common well, because everyone knows that nothing says festive like waiting in line for a bucket of water you wouldn't dare drink. Here you'll find a grilled whole pig whose snout is still intact for authenticity, steaks of mutton that jiggle suspiciously, and festival bread that's more leather than loaf. You watch a gaggle of children gnawing on rock-hard rolls like prehistoric terrors, hoping they don't crack a tooth that'll go untreated for months. As the sun climbs, minstrels arrive, carrying lutes that have seen better days. Their music floats across the village like a drunken lullaby. The fiddle squeaks, the drum thumps, and someone rings a bell, either to start the jig or warn everyone that the Tanner family dog has escaped and is doing laps. Either way, it's your cue to join the throng. You grab a wooden tankard and pay 3 pennies for a half pint of ale that tastes like barley water and regret. But hey, at least it won't kill you. Probably. Soon you're in the center of a circle where the great dance is about to commence. A local bard shouts instructions. Left foot, right foot, spin like a dizzy goat. People tumble over one another in a tangle of mismatched clothing and bare feet. Your toes are getting stepped on so badly you consider rooting yourself into the earth like a stubborn tree. But you keep dancing because stopping means you'll miss the next round of bread balls flung by the baker's daughter, an honor you can't pass up. Between dances, you sneak off to the games. The tallest man competition involves standing on a wooden box and holding a staff, trying not to topple like a crooked fence post. The winner gets a loaf of stale bread. You cheer because honestly, any food is a miracle at this point. Next is tug of straw, which is exactly what you think, a rope that turns your hands into shredded meat. You lose spectacularly, falling face first into the straw pile, earning peals of laughter from the onlookers and a bruised ego to carry home. Midday arrives and the sun is relentless. Sweat drips into your eyes, mixing with the dust until all you see is a blurry swirl of linen tunics and ceramic mugs. You spot the healer's tent where someone is demanding a poultice for their wound, which looks suspiciously like a mosquito bite. The healer, armed with a jar of honey, sheep fat, and a prayer, slaps a paste on the claimant's thigh and sends them on their questionable way. You wonder if you should get some for your own blistered feet, but then you realize they'll charge you half a loaf of bread for the privilege. The highlight of the festival is the mock joust, which is less armor-clad beauty and more 2 fellows in padded wool jackets charging at each other with lopsided poles. They crash together with a thud that rattles your teeth. One of them falls into the mud, and the other trips on his own pole and somersaults like a startled rabbit. They each get a prize, a ribbon made of old cloth. Their wives cheer them on, tossing bits of cheese into the crowd, because medieval etiquette meant celebrating victory by littering. As afternoon wanes, the religious procession begins. The local priest emerges, wearing vestments that have not seen daylight in weeks, carrying a relic that's either a saint's bone or a piece of chalk. No one's quite sure. He blesses the crowd with holy water in a rusty bucket. You're hit square in the chest by a droplet. Does it cure your festival-induced indigestion? Probably not. but it's a small miracle to be marked by the church, even if it's just because you paid your tithe the day before. The final act is the grand feast, where the Lord's steward presides over massive platters of peacock stuffed with more peacock for dramatic effect, venison cooked until it dissolves into fatty suspicion, and loaves of honey cake so sweet you swear your teeth are crystallizing mid-chew. You're seated on a long bench, jostling elbows with the blacksmith, the local reeve, and that one cousin who thinks he's funnier than he actually is. You take a tiny bite of roast bird and immediately regret it, because your stomach is now a battleground between medieval spices and medieval bacteria. But then comes the moment you've waited for, the wassail bowl. A bubbling brew of ale, spices, apple scraps, and questionable fruit that's been fermenting since last winter. You dip your ladle into the froth and bring it to your lips. The flavor is a riot. Sweet, sour, fuzzy, and likely lethal if you're unlucky. You drink, you wince, you laugh, because this is medieval celebration in its purest form. Communal suffering, communal joy, and shared nausea. As dusk settles, torches are lit, and the final swirl of music begins again. You're back in the circle, stomping your feet, twirling, cursing your lack of arch support. You tie your broken shoelace into your neighbor's beard for safety, because in these archives of absurdity, personal boundaries are optional. You laugh, you sing, and you nearly topple into the mud as the village tanner staggers past, singing an off-key hymn. By the time you finally stumble home, shirt torn, shoes missing, soul full of dust, you collapse onto your straw mattress. Your stomach churns, your joints ache, and your lungs taste like last night's bonfire. But tomorrow, you'll wake up and do it all over again. Because this is medieval life, a never-ending parade of festivals that promise glory and deliver glorified ruin, and you wouldn't have it any other way. At least until the hangover wears off. The sun hasn't quite risen, but your head is already pounding like a smith's hammer. You peel yourself off the straw mattress, stickiness clinging where nightmares soaked in ale haven't quite dried. Your neighbor's pig has claimed your pillow, and you wonder if it's judging you. One eye open, you search for your shoes, only to find one by the hearth and the other lying in a puddle of yesterday's festival muck. You cradle your temples with the solemnity of a monk on Vespers. Today is day 2, and somehow the festival never sleeps, so neither can you. By first light, the village green is already stirring. Stall owners hang ragged cloths over their carts to catch the dew. Banner poles, festooned with ribbons as faded as your memory of last night, creak against the wooden frame of the gallows. You know, for that authentic medieval ambiance. A bleary-eyed musician tunes a lute that's missing 2 strings. You scratch at your beard, trying to decipher if that smell is you or the sheep dung from the thoroughfare. You shuffle toward the ale tent, but the brewer is nowhere to be found, probably hiding from the debts of yesterday's tab. Instead, you find his apprentice, a scrawny lad with a face like boiled ham and the vigor of someone who's never tasted mead. He slides you a half-pint of flat brown liquid that tastes of yesterday's barley and tomorrow's regrets. You gulp it down as if it's medicine, because for your hangover, it might as well be. With the first sip, you feel your spirits lift enough to remember why you keep coming back. The games. Today's main event is the rat race, a delightful ordeal where half-starved rodents scuttle through a narrow plank to win a scrap of cheese. You join the crowd, cheering when a particularly fearless rat named Longtail lunges for the prize and promptly falls off, disappearing into the muck. The loser's consolation prize is a pat on the head with the Lord's velvet glove, sticky with aristocratic perspiration. While you're marveling at rodent on board peril, you notice the juggling monks. Yes, the same pious brewers from the abbey, robes stained with hops, tossing apples in ceramic chalices with surprising flair. They wink at each other between catches, one of them probably thinking about sacraments, the other about sacrilege. An apple escapes his grasp, smashing a peasant's wooden bowl. The crowd gasps, then howls with laughter. Discipline in monasteries, indeed. Nearby, the herbalist's booth promises miracle cures for the alcohol-blighted soul. A woman cradles an onion to her forehead, convinced its vapors will draw out the spirits. You're tempted. After spending half a loaf and a prayer for yesterday's wounds, you figure an onion dip might be worth your last penny. But the herbalist demands a chicken foot in trade. You check your pouch. Empty. The festival economy is merciless. Instead, you drift toward the moral debate, an extravaganza in which the local priest and the village fool duel in rhetorical wit. The priest argues that all this revelry is sinful, wasteful of resources, breeding hubris, and inviting the devil's laughter. The fool counters that sin and laughter are cousins, and if the devil's around, at least he's having a good time. You laugh so hard you nearly topple into the muck again. The priest, eyes blazing beneath his tonsure, flings a scroll at the fool, who catches it and bowing, recites the Lord's Prayer backward. The crowd erupts. Your sides ache from laughter and maybe from that second helping of venison you shouldn't have had. Hunger hits you like a battering ram. You wander to a mural-sized spit roasting a whole sheep, eyes and head intact as tradition demands. People line up with wooden bowls, hoping for a slice that hasn't fallen into the dirt. You collect yours, gristle, fat, and a sliver of meat. You chew it thoughtfully, as if performing a culinary rite. Flavor, smoldering ash, clay dust, and vague notes of rosemary. Texture, rubber meets lawn, but you're starving, so you swallow with the gratitude of a saint receiving alms. Between bites, you spy a contest of noble courtesy, where two merchants attempt courtly bows with such elaborate cartwheels that dignity is a distant memory. Spectators wager sheep wool and fishing hooks on who'll splat first. You bet on the older merchant, hoping for a swift downfall, rather than a protracted display of elbow grease. He wins, by collapsing into a hay bale with legs pointing skyward. The crowd roars, and hay explodes in every direction, like confetti at a wedding you weren't invited to. The hours drag on as procession after procession winds around the green. First came the children dressed as saints, drooling into their beards of fake wool. Then came the craftsmen parading their wares, a blacksmith brandishing a horseshoe as if it were Excalibur, a tanner showing off his supple leather that reeked of curing pits, and the apothecary who promises dreams of sugar plums if you just buy his powder. No one asks if it actually contains sugar. In medieval commerce, belief is currency. Afternoon heat intensifies. You're slick with sweat, and your tunic clings to you like a second skin. You limp toward the shade of the great oak tree, where a stranger has set up truth or dare. You step up, hoping for a truth that'll distract you from the searing sun. Instead, you're dared to swallow a spoonful of pickled eel brine. The liquid slithers down your throat with a vengeance, and you howl, eyes watering, nose burning. The crowd cheers. Your suffering is entertainment, your agony a public service. Next on the roster is the pig bingo. A muddied sow wanders around a chalked ring with letters at each notch. Villagers shout, waving scraps of parchment, D4, G7. When the pig stops at the letter B2, two men clash over the prize, half a dozen eggs. You're appalled that eggs are prized above pigs, but then again, protein is a rare luxury. You buy a ticket, get C3, and watch as the pig, evidently bored, squeezes through a gap in the fence and bolts into the cornfield. The hostess shrugs. Next time, bigger fence? She says, wiping sweat onto her already filthy apron. Somewhere in the chaos, you catch sight of a stranger performing fire eating. He swallows a torch, belching flame that sets a tuft of his beard ablaze. You'd warn him, but you're far too busy dodging chunks of cheese hurled from the balcony above. It seems an inebriated baroness has taken offense to your applause. Medieval etiquette dictates you either duck or pay. You duck, cheese whizzes past, leaving a greasy stain on your sleeve. You wonder what fabric softener is. Medieval smell is starting to become your natural state. As the day wanes, the mood grows rowdier. The ale tent expands its offerings to festival mead, which is code for leftover honey water, fermented in a barrel that used to hold pickled herrings. You decide to risk it. After all, you've survived everything else. The mead hits harder than a mace to the knee. You sway, teeth chattering from the briny undertones, and suddenly the world tilts sideways. You hold on to a post, carved with grotesque faces of laughing gargoyles, for dear life. Your final mission is the lantern release. At twilight, everyone gathers with candles and hollowed gourds. You light yours, feeling that soft tingle of wax dribbling onto your fingers. The lanterns ascend, wobbling like ghostly jellyfish against the bruised sky. You watch as your lantern catches a breeze, pulling it skyward until it's a pale dot on the horizon. For a moment, you feel transcendence. Then your lantern jerks and swirls, as if hitching a ride on a falcon's wing, before plummeting into the hedgerow with a wet thud. You laugh, because medieval magic is just bad wiring and worse materials. And then the bonfire. logs crowned with the effigy of old winter, ready to burn away your sorrows and any chance of sober remembrance. Flames lick the darkness, sparks ascending like drunken fireflies. You fling yourself into its glow, arms outstretched, chanting a rhyme you can't fully remember, but sounds impressive enough. Winter's ghost, be gone, ash and smoke, take you on. The effigy catches, roaring to life. You cheer as someone hands you a horn to blow, and you blow so hard you nearly swallow the mouthpiece. The fire crackles, illuminating every face in raucous delight and terrified awe. Smoke stings your eyes, and you cough, smearing soot across your cheeks like war paint. By the time the embers die and torches burn low, you're so spent you can't lift a foot. The festival, magnificent, absurd, and wholly exhausting, finally grinds to a halt. You crawl away from the square, guided by the sliver of moon and the occasional owl's judgmental hoot. Your feet are blistered, your clothes torn, and your soul craves nothing more than a tankard of clean water. But you know tomorrow you'll return, because in medieval life, festivals aren't once-in-a-lifetime events, they're every other day. You collapse onto your mattress, breathing in the still warm air, heart pounding in sync with your resurrected hangover. Your dreams tease you with visions of dancing rats, juggling monks, and flying cheese. Tomorrow, you promise yourself, you'll stay home. But deep down, you know the pull of chaos is stronger than your fear of indigestion. Sweet sleep overtakes you, and the last thing you hear is your neighbor's pig snuffling contentedly. Medieval festivals, the gift that keeps on giving until it takes everything. Dawn cracks like a whip across the village, and you wake with the subtle grace of a catapult. Your straw mattress feels like a medieval torture device, and your joints creak as though you've spent the night reenacting a siege. Day 3 of the festival beckons, and despite every fiber of your being screaming, "Stay in bed," you'll haul yourself upright, because who could resist another round of communal misery? You stumble into the common area and find a scrap of yesterday's bread crust on the table. You nibble it out of desperation, ignoring the curious assortment of grit and who knows what that crunches alongside the stale dough. Breakfast of champions, indeed. The baker's apprentice yawns from behind a cart, offering you a halfpenny bun if you'll fetch him a pail of water. You agree, mainly because it spares you from carrying your own bucket, and because aerobic chores count as festival participation, right? On the edge of the green, carpenters erect a rickety scaffold for today's tower climb, a contest where participants race to scale a 100-foot pole smeared with tallow. The prize, an ornate ladle and a pat on the back from the Lord Steward. You eye the greased pole, slick like an eel in a bath, and wonder whether you're brave or just bankrupt. Before you can decide, someone shoves a ladle into your hand and yells, "Go!" You sprint forward, unprepared for the greasy ascent, and find yourself halfway up before gravity reminds you that medieval physics spares no fool. You slide back, arms flailing, and land in a heap that's more pigpen than podium. The crowd howls. You accept your consolation pat, gummy with sweat and tallow. Having survived that, you limp toward the ale tent, determined to fortify yourself. Today's specialty is herbal brew, which the brewer claims includes nettles, juniper berries, and a herb that wardens off evil spirits. It tastes like you strapped a pine cone to your tongue and set it ablaze. But it's a festival, so you gulp it down, savoring the illusion of bravery. Meanwhile, a traveling juggler sways drunkenly nearby, keeping 3 flaming torches aloft and occasionally dropping one into the brewer's keg. The resulting hiss curdles your blood, but all that happens is more steam, and somehow more sales. You wander toward the feats of strength area, where villagers test their mettle. First up, the woodcutter's challenge. You heft an axe nearly as tall as you and swing at a log. It resists like a stubborn ox, and on your 3rd blow, your axe head flies off, pinging the blacksmith's helmet across the field. You scramble for the axe head, hopelessly entangled in your own tunic, and finally collapse against the stump. You win a bruised ego and a splinter in your palm. The blacksmith offers to patch your axe. Once you pay him 2 pennies and an oath not to use it as a percussion instrument again. Next is the bellowing contest, where participants bellow like bulls to see who can shatter the morning's peace most effectively. You bellow with the ferocity of a wounded goat echoing through the surrounding woods. A flock of birds takes flight in alarm, scattering like confetti. You're declared a co-champion alongside old Greta, who emits a bellow so high-pitched it cracks the blacksmith's anvil. Your prize, a handful of garlic cloves purportedly for warding off werewolves, rabid dogs, and nosy in-laws. Hungry now, because exertion burns more calories than beer, you gravitate toward the food stalls. You pay a halfpenny for a bowl of porridge thick enough to stand a spoon upright. It's sweetened with honey and flavored with raisins so dried they could double as ammunition. You stir it with a wooden spoon that might have been unearthed from a Viking burial site. Each spoonful holds an element of danger, a stray twig, a lurking clod of dirt, and the faint suspicion that the honey was filtered through someone's sleeve. But hunger silences your complaints, and you eat like a peasant in a land run by toothless lords. As you finish, a horn sounds, the signal for the sacred animal parade. Today the chosen beast is a cow bedecked in ribbons and bells. It ambles past the crowd, unfazed by the chaos, chewing cud with the dignity of a mobile shrine. Villagers toss bits of hay into its stall, hoping for a blessing. You kneel before it, offering your thumb, and whisper a prayer for immunity from festival-induced dysentery. The cow snorts, which you interpret as divine approval. The afternoon heat is relentless, and you seek solace beneath the great oak once more. There, you find the fortune-teller, draped in chartreuse robes that clash horrifically with the natural setting. She peers into a bowl of water and pronounces that your future holds much trial, more hardship, and $1 of luck in the ale tent. You pay her and leave, wondering if she's describing your entire life or just today. Either way, the vague promise keeps you going. Then comes the crescendo of ceremonial absurdity, the nightly mock battle. Ragtag villagers don crudely painted shields and wooden swords, charging at each other with all the zeal of the hopeless. You're conscripted into the red team, though your crimson sash looks more like expired blood pudding. You charge, shield raised, and immediately get knocked sideways by a farmhand wielding a broomstick like a mace. You tumble across the field, scraping your elbow on a loose stone, and roll into the enemy lines. Somehow, you emerge victorious, clutching your wooden sword like Excalibur's ungainly cousin. Your reward? A toasted marrow bone. You gnaw at the marrow, tasting of earth and ancient stew. No festival is complete without the midday sermon on moderation, delivered by the local cleric, whose sermonizing voice drills into your skull like a carpenter's awl. He decries the sins of gluttony, drunkenness, and general indecency, gesturing fervently with a goose quill. You nod dutifully, though your brain is busy cataloging all the ways you'll ignore his advice as soon as he's done. The sermon ends with a prayer, and you slip out the back, one hand shielding your eyes from the glare of his piety. With half the day still left, you wander to the bardic showcase, where minstrels compete for the title of festival troubadour. The first performer strums a lute so out of tune it could summon demons. The next recites an epic poem about a knight whose horse ran away. When the third bard collapses mid-song from poetic exhaustion, the crowd chants for you to take the stage. Before you can protest, you're handed a drumstick and a clay pot. You bang out a rhythm so primitive it sounds like your hangover manifesting as music. The crowd cheers, partly out of pity, partly because no one else is left. You bow, earning a mug of watered-down cider and a place in festival lore as that one villager. Evening creeps in, and you find yourself drawn back to the ale tent. Tonight's roster includes Stout of Sorrow, a dark brew that tastes of burnt toast and broken promises. You suspect the brewer will sneak something sharper in for flavor, but you're too weary to care. You knock back a tankard, wince at the first gulp, and lean against the tent pole, letting the aroma of hops and smoke wash over you like a toxic hug. Nearby, the blacksmith invites you to try his portable forge demonstration. He ignites a tiny fire in a metal box and softens a horseshoe until it glows bright orange. Sparks fly like miniature fireworks. You stare entranced, feeling a primitive kinship with the heat and hammering. You reach out to touch the forge. Bad idea. You jerk your hand back, searing a blister that will last until next festival. Pain has a way of reminding you that you're alive. Suddenly, a distant bell tolls, the cue for the masked dance. Participants don masks carved from wood or papier-mâché, grotesque faces, animal snouts, exaggerated expressions. You find a mask depicting a cockatrice, slip it on, and join the circle. The dancers twist and stomp in a macabre ballet, the masks amplifying every fearful squeak and howl. You step on someone's toes, one mask strap snaps, and you spend the dance chasing it across the field. You finally secure it, hair askew, arms akimbo, and finish the routine with a flourish that earns applause and a bruised shin. The grand finale arrives, the lighting of the beacon. On a hill overlooking the village stands a tall scaffold crowned with flammable pitch. You climb the hill with the rest of the revelers, mud squelching underfoot. At the summit, you're handed a torch lit from the bonfire embers. You hesitantly touch it to the scaffold, which erupts in flame, sending sparks spiraling skyward like golden rain. The heat is oppressive, and you retreat a few paces, blinking against the glare. The beacon blazes, guiding lost travelers, if any exist, and signaling the closing of day 3. You descend the hill, soot smudging your cheeks and lungs tasting like a blacksmith's hearth. Your steps are heavy, each one a reminder of the day's trials. The greasy pole, the greasy brew, the greasy, well, everything. Yet beneath the exhaustion lies a spark of triumph. You survived another day of festival madness, another chapter in the chronicle of communal absurdity. Back at your hut, you collapse onto the straw once more. Your body aches in places you didn't know existed. Elbows, shins, dignity. You drift into a fitful sleep, half dreaming of tomorrow's final act, the grand feast and prize-giving ceremony. If you're lucky, you'll earn a loaf of bread or a ribbon, or at least a respectable hangover to brag about. In medieval life, every dawn brings a new spectacle of survival, and you, weary traveler, have mastered the art of enduring chaos. Rest now, for tomorrow's curtain call awaits, and the festival's final note will echo long into legend. The dawn of day 4 arrives cloaked in mist and the lingering stench of yesterday's bonfire. You surface from your straw mattress like a revenant, joints protesting in multiple medieval dialects. Today is the festival's grand finale. Feast, prizes, and the slow decline into collective amnesia. No more games, no more mock battles, just one last push of absurdity before your body demands a ceasefire. You emerge bleary-eyed onto the village green where the smell of roasting meat mingles with damp earth. A massive spit turns slowly, bearing aloft a whole boar that looks suspiciously like last year's festival mascot, nostrils flaring, eyes glassy, and tusks gleaming in the morning light. Beside it, a row of steaming cauldrons bubbles with stews so thick you could stand a ladle upright in them. Today, hospitality meets medieval biology in a glorious collision of flavors and potential food poisoning. Your first task is to claim your place at the long refectory table. You elbow past a knot of merchants still clutching their prize ribbons from yesterday's contests. The steward, wearing a robe too elaborate for festival cleanup, gestures you forward with a flourish. You slide onto the bench, knees knocking the person next to you, a traveling minstrel who's nursing a blister and a lute. You nod in solidarity before reaching for your wooden bowl. A server materializes, ladle in hand, pouring you a portion of kitchen sink stew, a concoction that genuinely might include every leftover in the village. Turnips, mutton scraps, barley grains, and a suspicious chunk you choose not to identify. You take a bite, marveling at the way it tastes like the sum total of communal negligence. Yet somehow, that's exactly why it's delicious. You swallow, salute the cook with a grunt, and prepare for the next course. Course 2 arrives. Pottage royale, which is basically kitchen sink stew dressed up with a handful of herbs stolen from the healer's garden. You eat it ceremonially, as though performing a rite of passage into full peasanthood. Meanwhile, trumpets announce the arrival of the Lord's dish, swan pie, which sounds regal until you realize the filling is mostly gelatinized fat and bone shards masquerading as crust. The Lord carves a slice for himself, 3 mouthfuls, and then gestures for the children to come forward. Child labor never tasted so crunchy. Between bites, announcements crackle through the crowd like fireflies. Prize winners are called up: the woodcutter's champion, the rat race victor, the champion bellower, the tower climber who didn't fall too far. You applaud politely, though you secretly suspect that half the prizes will end up languishing in attics or as doorstops. Your own ribbon, that one villager, is produced at last, a scrap of cloth that the steward waves like a flag before handing it to you. You tie it to your tunic, feeling oddly proud of your minimal achievement. Then comes the grand raffle. Each villager's name, carved into wooden tokens, is tossed into a cauldron-like hat. The steward dips in and draws a name, your neighbor Bertha. She stumbles forward, clutching her token, and is awarded a barrel of ale. You cheer until you remember that a barrel of ale in a hut means weeks of arguing over who drank the last pint. Bertha weaves back to her place, eyes shining with tipsy triumph, and you realize that envy is as old as communal suffering. Next up, the festival prize of merit, a golden goblet inscribed with the village's emblem, a plow crossed with a pitching fork. The steward beckons the village elder, a wizened woman whose memory is as long as her laundry list of warnings about kids these days. She takes the goblet, raises it overhead, and pronounces a blessing that's mostly about never forgetting to pay your taxes. You ponder if divine intervention includes paperwork. As the feast winds down, servers sweep away empty bowls and replace them with wooden plates of honey cakes. They're as sweet as any modern dessert, but lack the emergent sophistication of sugar perfection. You savor the honey cake like a pagan offering, crumbs gathering in the creases of your tunic. Each bite is a reminder that, in medieval times, dessert was a luxury you earned through multiple near-death experiences. Amidst the remnants of the feast, a hush falls as the final performance begins. A troupe of masked dancers emerges, clad in motley patched together from the festival's lost ribbons and stray burlap sacks. Their movements are an eerie ballet, twisting, shimmying, stomping, invoking everything from harvest rituals to visits from the underworld. You watch transfixed as they spin beneath the pale sky, their masks distorted into gurns and grins. It's the last major spectacle, and you feel the thrill of communal absurdity coursing through you one final time. Suddenly, drums roll and a pageantry procession advances, torchbearers, minstrels, prize winners holding their tokens aloft, and the Lord himself on a chipped wooden throne. He surveys the assembled throng, his expression unreadable beneath a velvet hat that's slightly askew. He raises his hand and delivers a speech that's equal parts gratitude, admonition, and tax reminder. You catch phrases like communal harmony, divine favor, and obey your social superiors, nodding along while your brain files it under epic pep talk. With the speech concluded, torches are relit and the crowd gathers for one last communal drink. A massive cauldron appears filled with festival punch, ale, mead, suet, berries, and enough spices to stun a boar. You step forward, ladle trembling in hand, and dip into the brew. The aroma is heady, sweet vinegar, burnt honey, and the faintest hint of something fermented since autumn. You sip and wince, then wince again, and finally grin, because this is the apex of medieval conviviality, a spirited blend of sugar and suffering. As you raise your cup to toast, you catch sight of your fellow villagers, laughing, coughing, smearing punch across each other's faces in affectionate mockery. In that moment, you realize the festival's true purpose isn't the games or the prizes. It's the ritual of survival, the collective reaffirmation that you can endure mud, heat, flies, stale bread, and the occasional fireball in your mouth, together. You clink cups, hearts warm despite the cold pinch of impending remorse. The carnival atmosphere shifts as the steward signals the end. Musicians strike a final chord, dancers freeze mid-twirl, and the villagers fall silent. The flags droop, the banners sag, and the gallows pole, still festooned with tattered ribbons, stands as the quiet sentinel of the festival's end. You feel a pang of melancholy mixed with relief. Another 4 days of chaos have passed, leaving you battered, bloated, and oddly bonded with your mud-spattered neighbors. You pack up your ribbon, your goblet, and your half-melted honey cake. As you trudge home, the sun dips low, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges. Crickets begin their evening chorus, and you hear the first distant howl of a festival dog scavenging scraps. Your steps slow, exhaustion rooting in your bones. You know that after the festival, life will return to its usual rhythms of toil and hardship, but for these 4 days, you've tasted something transcendent, the communal madness that unites a whole village in raucous celebration. Back in your hut, you lay out your prizes, a ribbon, a goblet, and questionable wooden tokens. You collapse onto your straw mattress, limbs splayed like a defeated puppet. Your stomach churns with memories of punch, stew, and roving pigs. Your mind drifts to tomorrow's promise of sleep. Deep, uninterrupted, and free from the flicker of torchlight, you whisper a final prayer of thanks to any deity listening, offering your gratitude in exchange for a hangover that doesn't require a poultice. As you drift off, the final echo of festival revelry tugs at your consciousness, the clang of a lute string, the thud of a drum, the distant roar of laughter. You smile, because no matter how absurd or brutal it was, you wouldn't trade those 4 days for any modern holiday. The medieval festival was, in its terrible glory, the ultimate testament to human resilience, an annual testament that, together, we can survive almost anything. Until next year, you dream of muddy green fields and half-priced bread, ready to embrace the chaos once more. Imagine wielding a glowing iron bar with one hand, while your other hand grips a hammer the size of a toddler, every strike sending shockwaves through your bones and singing your ears with the roar of the forge. Before you know it, your apron is drenched in sweat and soot, and you realize this is just breakfast. The sun hasn't fully crested the thatched rooftops when you shove open your workshop door, the hinges groaning like a dying ox. Your first order of business: stoke the fire. You shovel coal and charcoal into the hearth, each handful landing with a clatter that echoes through the silence of dawn. Sparks fly up your nostrils, settling like miniature stars across your face. You cough, blow blackened fingers against your tunic, and light the bellows. A gust of oxygen hits the embers, turning them into a blinding blaze. The forge flames to life, painting the walls in hellish orange, and you grin because without this inferno, you might as well be a yodeling monk. Next, you reach for the anvil, your trusty granite altar. It weighs more than your goat, but you've grown accustomed to hefting it into position with the help of your neighbor's cartwheel and several choice curses. You wipe the surface with a rag, though it never really gets clean. Nicks, dents, and half-forgotten metal flakes form a constellation of past failures and victories. You tap it with your hammer to test the resonance. It sings back in a dull, satisfied thud. The day's first rhythm is set. Your first customer of the morning arrives, the village reeve, stomping in with boots so muddy you half expect a vole to tumble out. "Need horseshoes," he growls, flaring his nostrils like an agitated boar. He slams a hoof on the anvil's edge to demonstrate. You squint at the foot, wondering if that's a nail or a bone fragment sticking out. He insists on an extra-wide shoe for comfort. You take the hoof, hang it by a rope from the ceiling beam, the medieval equivalent of an MRI, and prepare your tools: tongs, hammer, rasp, and another hammer, just in case. You dip the hot iron shoe blank into the forge, steam hissing like a dragon's warning. You clamp it in the tongs, carry it to the anvil, and strike. Sparks launch like fireworks as you shape the curve, sweat dripping into your eyes until every swing feels like a small earthquake. You work in a seamless ballet of blows. Flatten here, bend there, tap twice, and spin the iron on the anvil's horn. The shoe takes form, curving to cradle the hoof like a metallic hug. You quench it in the trough. Water splashes up, chilling one hand to the bone while the other still burns. You rasp the edges smooth, punch nail holes, and flare the rim. Finally, you slide it back onto the heated hoof, hammer each nail flush, and step back to admire your handiwork. The reeve stomps around, nods, and tosses you 3 pennies, muttering that you owe him extra for his exquisite work. You pocket the coins, figuring you'll spend them on ale later, medicine for the soul. No time to rest. A gust of wind rattles the door. Your childhood friend, the miller's daughter, sweeps in carrying a rusted plowshare. She flops it on your bench with a whimper. "Can you sharpen this before sundown?" she asks, eyes wide with hope. You glance at the contorted metal and offer your trademark smile. Half encouragement, half pity. You position the share in the vise, metal jaws grinding into the weathered steel like a vice grip on sanity. You use the file, a relic inherited from your father, then his father, to remove the worst nicks. Every stroke takes years off your knuckles, but eventually you reveal a shiny bevel. You heft it, gaze down the edge, and give a test cut on a scrapboard. It bites cleanly, nearly splitting wood in half. She beams, slips you a loaf of bread glazed with honey, and scurries off before you can ask for proper payment. By mid-morning, the workshop grows smoky, and your lungs stage a protest. You pause to sip water from a wooden mug, water you're almost certain could harbor medieval superbugs. You wash it down with a hunk of that honeyed bread, flecks of crust crumbling into your beard. You glance at the door as a ring of customers begins to circle. The baker wants a mold to stamp his new batch of hearth loaves. The carpenter needs metal hinges for a chest that will probably fall apart in a week, and the black-robed priest requests a simple iron cross to hang over the church door. You stifle a groan. Crafting a cross is like making a horseshoe for a baby bird, but duty calls. You sweep ashes from the hearth and reload the fire. Each shovelful reminds you that mining coal is a cruel joke on humanity, but there's no alternative. The forge roars again. You pick up a length of iron rod and twist it, your bare hands blistering against the heat. You shape it into simple scrolls for decorative hinges, each curve a testament to your stubborn artistry. The rod resists, bending unpredictably, so you hammer it straight, reheat, twist again, and repeat until the scroll resembles something you'd actually hang on a door. You plunge it into the quenching jar and watch the steam billow, the iron squealing as if scolded. You judge the finish, grind off any rough spots, and punch holes for wood screws. You line them up, 4 matching hinges, ready for installation on a chest that will no doubt be used for donkey feed. The sun climbs high and sweat streams down your back like a medieval waterfall. You pause to stretch, arching your spine, rolling your shoulders, cracking vertebrae that groan louder than the anvil. The mid-morning lull sets in, a brief window before the afternoon rush. You lean on your hammer, gaze around at the tools scattered like bones, and ask yourself, why do you do this? For the pride of creation? For the kingship of fire? Or because every morning you wake to the same hammer and anvil, and you know no other life? But then you catch sight of a half-forged sword blade shimmering in the forge glow, and the answer hits you. Because no matter how brutal, forging metal is the closest thing you've ever felt to godhood. The lull shatters as a strapping footman stomps in, his mail clinking like wind chimes. He drags in a battered sword scabbard and demands you replace the chape. The chape, an ornamental metal cap on the sheath's tip, must reflect his lord's prestige. You extract the old piece, bent and nearly rusted through. With tongs and a muttered apology to your ancestors, you forge a new cap from a scrap of steel. Flatten, shape, carve tiny ridges and heat it to cherry red. Sparks fly as you carve a crude fleur-de-lis decoration, a symbol of nobility if ever there was one. You cool it, solder it onto the scabbard tip using a mix of beeswax and powdered tin, your best medieval glue, and polish the surface until it gleams like morning dew. The footman inspects it, nods curtly, and tosses another purse of pennies onto the bench. You flick them into your leather pouch, grimacing at the weight that means more hammering to come. Lunchtime arrives with no warning. Only your stomach announces it by murmuring like a disgruntled donkey. You wipe your brow, stash your apron behind a stack of iron scraps, and retreat to a corner bench. You unwrap the last of your honey bread and pair it with a chunk of cold cheese so sharp it could shave. A swig of water washes it down, though you practically taste the earth in every drop. You pause to watch a fly land on your lunch. You flick it away and wonder if it's safer than a bite from a stranger's spoon. You swallow your meal in 3 bites and lunge back to the forge. No time for dawdling when steel demands attention. Your afternoon begins with a custom order, decorative nails for the new tavern door. The brewer's wife wants each nail stamped with a pretzel motif, because nothing says "drink here" like iron pretzels hammered into the wood. You cut lengths of mild steel rod, flatten one end, and heat them. With a small punch, you imprint the pretzel design, 3 holes and 2 loops, then taper the nail shaft and file a point. You repeat this process 50 times, each nail more identical than the last, though your wrist threatens revolt. You load them into a wooden box, tie it with twine, and send it off with instructions on installation. Hammer in gently, or the motif will bend like a drunkard's promise. By late afternoon, fatigue sets in like a creeping fog. Your arms feel as though they might detach at the elbows, and every joint aches with ancient grievances. Yet the forge still blazes, demanding one last job before dusk. You retrieve the sword blade from its earlier forging, now cooled, hardened, and waiting for its final profile. You clamp it in the vise and begin filing the edge, coaxing it to razor sharpness. Metal shavings curl at your feet, and each stroke sparks tiny arcs as file meets steel. Your reflection shimmers in the blade, gaunt cheeks, smudged brow, eyes glowing with fevered intensity. You guide the file with both precision and brute force, sculpting a weapon that could split a man's skull or a melon with equal ease. As the light outside reddens, you finish the edge, Test it on a scrap wooden post and watch it slice through like a phantom. You sheath it, fitting the freshly made chap, and hold it aloft. The sword catches the fiery light, radiating deadly grace. You feel a surge of triumph. After hours of labor, you have created a tool of war and protection, a masterpiece born from sweat and flame. The sky dims and the forge's glow becomes your sun. You quench the sword in oil, then wrap it carefully in linen for its new owner. You wipe your tools clean, well, as clean as rust and grime permit, and hang your apron. Your body trembles from exertion, hands stained black and lungs craving fresh air. You step outside into the cool evening, the village enveloped in the soft murmurs of returning laborers and bleating goats. You inhale deeply, tasting freedom between every ragged breath. Tomorrow you'll do it again, stoke the fire, bend the iron, and forge objects that shape lives and wars. But for tonight, you'll savor the ache in your limbs and the quiet pride of a day spent mastering fire and steel. You pat your anvil one last time, whisper a weary good night, and trudge home, ready to dream of red-hot metal dancing to the rhythm of your hammer. The sun has tipped past its zenith, and your face feels like a charred roof tile. You take a moment to lean against the anvil, breathing heavy, sweat beading on your brow. But rest is a luxury a medieval craftsman cannot afford. So you straighten your back, slap your leather apron into place, and march on. A knobbly-handed shepherd trudges in, clutching the twisted axle of a broken cart. He swears it snapped when his old mule hit a pothole the size of a toddler's grave. You size up the axle. Oak core, iron banding, splintered and oozing sap. You set it in the vise, wrap your massive hands around the jagged wood, and rip away the iron strips like you're peeling bark off a dying tree. Splinters embed in your palms. You curse the shepherd's ancestors for failing to maintain the road. Not that he paid taxes for a stone-paved thoroughfare. With a borrowed chisel, you carve away the worst shards, then heat new iron bands in the forge. Each band you hammer into place squeals in protest, biting into the oak with a hiss of steam and steam of smoke. The shepherd hovers, hands clasped like a novice praying for a miracle. You finish, tap the axle on the ground so it settles true, and hand it back. He offers you a goat's cheese, half the wheel, but you wave him off. You've already accepted 3 chickens, a promise of future eggs, and enough barley to brew a week's worth of hangovers and ale. Next in line, the baker's burly apprentice, lugging a set of bronze bread stamps, tiny molds his master uses to imprint loaves with flourishes. They've cracked from repeated use, corners chipped like ancient ruins. You take them one by one, gingerly mending each fracture with molten bronze, filling gaps until they bloom like repaired mosaics. The heat at the anvil forces sweat from every pore. Your shirt clings to you like an overripe fruit. With your hammer's edge, you file the joins flush, ensuring every decorative detail pops when pressed into dough. The apprentice, a lad with the complexion of a boiled beet, gawks in awe. He insists you keep one as a masterpiece, but you decline. Your collection of cracked pottery and bent metal is already encyclopedic. A shout at the workshop door alerts you to an unexpected visitor, the tax collector, flanked by 2 grim-faced guards. He unfurls a parchment, ink bleeding into the grooves of the vellum. You swallow, fingers slick with grease, and force a grin. The collector demands payment for the extortion, sorry civic improvements the village council claimed to have made. You open your coin pouch, the rattling is like chainmail on stone. He counts out 6 pennies, scowls that it's insufficient, and stamps his seal on your contract. You'll pay another penny come next full moon, or he'll take your anvil as collateral. You stare at your forge tools, imagining life without the clang of hammer on iron. The collector departs, purse plumper and conscience unburdened. You lock eyes with the guards, they leer at your calves. You make a mental note to sue for indecent exposure when the church finally invents lawyers. With your pockets significantly lighter, you spy your neighbor's son, a freckled troublemaker, eyeing the bellows like it's a mechanical dragon. You grab a chunk of coal and toss it in. Too much air will scorch the iron, too little and the metal won't bend. The boy jumps and giggles, leaping back as if you'd conjured a fire sprite. You ruffle his hair and hand him a small horseshoe, a trinket later to be nailed over a barn door for luck. He runs off like a fledgling, clinking the prize against stones, certain that the world now bows to his whims. Midday hunger gnaws at your gut. You wipe the grime from your forehead and head for the tavern. Inside, the air is thick with smoke so dense you could slice it with a knife. The brewer's daughter slides you a plate of mutton stew, greasy broth, root vegetables hacked into angular confetti, and chunks of meat tougher than your resolve. You shovel it down, ignoring the stray bone fractals, and wash it away with a mug of ale so dark it could swallow light. You listen to the villagers swap gossip. The miller's daughter ran off with the blacksmith's journeyman. The priest has taken to sleeping under the church pew to avoid his nagging housekeeper, and the reeve discovered his mule in a neighbor's barn. You chortle at their misfortunes and toss a penny on the table. The tavern keeper nods, slides you another ale, and you settle in. You've earned at least one lazy moment before the afternoon deluge of orders resumes. Back at your forge, a pallet of iron rings awaits your attention. The local lord commissioned chainmail collars for his hunting dogs, reportedly to elevate their noble status. You heft each ring, heat it until it glows dull orange, and hammer the seams closed with 2 precise blows, one to the front, one to the back. Misalign the seam and the ring springs open under pressure, sending your dog into a yelp-fueled tantrum. You loop the rings together in interlocking unity, creating a mesh that's more grace than necessity. The Lord Steward will be delighted, until the dogs shake and tangle like drunken sailors. You pack the finished collars, tie them with twine, and dispatch them with a note. Handle with care, may excite more than your hounds. A sudden clamor draws your gaze. The village smith's apprentice has accidentally dropped a molten horseshoe into the hearth's supporting beam. Flames lick the timbers. Black smoke curls into the rafters. You sprint over, grabbing the apprentice by the collar and dragging him away before he catches on his smoldering tunic. You snatch a bucket of water, hurl it at the flames, and stomp at the embers with a muddy boot. The hackwork apprentices cower. You brandish your hammer like a cudgel. The beam's charred but intact. You pant, spat chunks of soot from your lips, and remind everyone that negligence isn't a recognized metalworking technique. The head mason mutters an apology, half because he's terrified, half because he owes you a favor. You nod, satisfied that the workshop remains standing. Losing your tools would be akin to losing your soul. Afternoon drifts in like a lazy ox. You glance at the sundial through the open door. It's time for leatherworking. You fetch a piece of cured hide, chalking out the pattern for a pair of sturdy gloves meant to protect the reeve's mail-clad hands from chafing. You slice the hide with a whittled knife, teeth dull but sharp enough, then pierce evenly spaced holes along the edges. You thread thongs of leather, lacing the pieces with the precision of an embroiderer. Halfway through, the sun dips behind clouds and a breeze stirs the smoke out of your lungs. You pause, inhaling the crisp air, and smile at the simple pleasure of raw materials transforming in your hands. As shadows stretch, a traveling minstrel appears at your door, lute in hand and hope in his eyes. He offers to play a tune, for a fee. You barter 2 nails and a handful of ring scraps, mainly to see if his music will actually cure the mounting tension in your shoulders. He strums a melody of whinnying horses and clanking armor. You nod appreciatively, tapping your hammer in time. The apprentice watches in awe. The hide laces together like a dream. For a fleeting moment, the clangor of the day softens into rhythm, and you realize that even in a world of sweat and soot, art persists. Nightfall approaches, though the sky remains a bruised purple, and you survey your day's haul. Horseshoes, cart axle, bread stamps, hinges, collars, gloves, and a smile from your apprentice. You feel the ache in your biceps, the burn in your lungs, and the buzz of satisfaction that only comes from shaping the world with fire and hammer. You grab a last swig of ale, flick a handful of embers into the cold night air, and whisper, "Good night" to your forge. Tomorrow you'll return for another dance with steel, but for now, you can savor the glow of a day well forged. The forge's embers glow like dying embers of a world on fire, but there's no time for sentimentality. This is the afternoon of day 3, and the clang of hammer on anvil never sleeps. You drizzle oil into the bellows pivot, each drop hissing as it hits hot iron. The bellows groan dutifully, fanning fresh life into your inferno. Sweat trickles down your spine. You're running on adrenaline and yesterday's ale. A lanky journeyman shuffles in, clutching a mangled plow coulter that looks like it fought a boar, and lost. He's covered in dung and optimism, eyes wide as he hands you the twisted metal. "Make it straight again," he begs. You heft it, inspecting the bend, a U-shape of protest. You clamp it in the vise, heat one end until it glows dull red, and begin coaxing it back to form. You tap at the concave side, then the convex, alternating hammer blows until the metal sighs into a forgiving curve. With a rasp, you clean up the edges, then quench and temper it in water mixed with vinegar, because acids make steel brittle and medieval folk thought brittle meant quick to break enemy shields. The journeyman nods, cradles the restored coulter like a newborn foal, and slips you a handful of wheat, tastes like hope in medieval poverty. No sooner does he leave than the black-robed priest returns, cross in hand, for the promised iron fixture above the church door. You grab a length of wrought iron rod, heat one end to a malleable glow, and shape a simple fleur-de-lis bracket. Each fold and curve feels like performing open-heart surgery on a beast of burden. You pick up the cross's wooden beam, test fit the bracket, then drill holes with a hand drill that chews wood like a goat chewing cud. You bolt the bracket in place. Using iron bolts you forged yourself, and step back. The priest utters a blessing that sounds like he's reading the Greek alphabet backward. You nod, wipe your hammer on your trousers, and pocket the payment. 2 silver deniers, and a vow that you'll never suffer hellfire if you keep making holy things. You consider taking the vow, just to have something holy in your otherwise profane life. The late afternoon shadow grows long, and a troupe of traveling actors appears, complete with painted faces and rattling tambourines. They request stage nails, short, stout spikes to anchor crude scenery to the barn wall. You measure lengths of iron rod, cut them with your temperamental hacksaw, it's only slightly less myth than Excalibur, and flatten heads on the anvil. You file the sharp ends to a fine point, sharp enough to pierce oak, but not so sharp to slice your fingers. 50 nails later, you hand them over. The actor-manager offers you a free show ticket, if you can survive their biggest hit, The Duke's Wife and the Dancing Donkey. You laugh, pocket the ticket, and wonder if surviving that play would be harder than your next forge project. Your stomach rumbles, reminding you that the tavern stew waits for no craftsman. You harvest a stale loaf from the shelf, still serviceable when dunked in broth, and down it with a swig of well water. No flies this time. They voted you least interesting meal. You sling your leather apron back on and return to the molten heart of your workshop. A sudden tremor rattles the floorboards as the Lord's Guard lumbers in, bearing a warhammer that's seen more battles than your grandpappy. The head is chipped, the haft splintered. "Make it like new," they command. You weigh the head in your hand, heavier than a sack of potatoes. You heat it in the forge until it hisses like a startled serpent, then tap it with a small hammer to re-center the metal's grain. Each blow sparks like a gunshot in the hush of cathedrals. You refill the hole in the haft with a new hickory shaft, sliced and carved by your best blade, then lash it tight with rawhide thongs soaked in hot water. The guard hefts it and gives a curt nod. He tosses you a gold thank you coin, enough to fill your purse for weeks of ale-fueled philosophizing. The afternoon sun sinks to your right, and a messenger boy scurries in, brandishing a scribbled note. Urgent. Fix the castle's gate latch before nightfall. You snatch the crudely drawn diagram, an elaborate mechanism involving springs that medieval locksmiths thought were witchcraft. You unravel the gate's decrepit latch. Gears grinding, springs broken, rivets rusted. You clear out the muck, forge replacement springs from spring steel, and polish each coil until it sings. You reassemble the mechanism, oil it with goose fat, and test the latch, smooth as a bard's croon. The messenger leaves a bag of silver pennies and runs off to deliver your work. You pocket the coins, muttering about setting a speed limit on youthful enthusiasm. With dusk approaching, you turn to the day's final task, forging a simple spearhead for the militia. You heat a bar of high carbon steel, so rare you treat it like a dragon scale, then hammer it thin on the anvil's flat. You taper the shaft, fold the tip into a diamond shape, and draw out a central ridge for strength. You punch a socket at the base, quench it in oil for hardness, then temper it over the forge's cooler embers to remove brittleness. You mount it on a shaft carved by the Carpentry Guild, gifts exchanged between trades, but you eyeball it, lash it in place with leather strips, and test its balance. Perfect. The militia captain arrives, salutes stiffly, and departs with a curt nod. You watch him stride away, spear glinting like a prayer to vigilantes. Night's first stars flicker, and your arms feel as though they might collapse under their own weight. You clean your tools, the tongs, hammers, files, chisels, each one a battle-scarred companion. You wipe the anvil's surface, sweep the floor of metal shavings, and bathe the forge in ash to smother any stray sparks. Your workshop falls silent, save for the distant croak of frogs and the rumble of returning villagers. You step outside into the cool night air. The moon casts silver highlights on your soot-smeared face. You breathe deeply, tasting freedom between sweat and smoke. The day's earnings, coins clinking in your pouch, jingle like a lullaby. You hug your hammer to your chest, whisper thanks to whichever gods you believe in, and trudge homeward, bones humming with exhaustion and pride. Tomorrow's sunrise will demand you again, to shape metal, to coax fire, to sculpt the iron will of history. But for now, you walk beneath the silent canopy of stars, each step a testament to the art of survival, in a world where steel bends only to those brave, or foolish, enough to master it. The sky bleeds indigo as you unlatch your workshop door one last time, stepping into the hush of evening. The forge's roar has given way to crickets' chirps and the distant bleat of a goat too proud or stubborn to return home. You shoulder your leather apron one final time, padding pockets heavy with coins that clang like distant church bells. Tonight, you'll trade sweat for silently earned rest, but first, the closing ritual. A timid knock interrupts the silence. The miller's wife stands on the threshold, clutching her husband's broken grain sieve. She gestures to the mesh frame, its iron wires snapped and twisted by too many bushels of barley. You usher her inside, light a single lamp, and examine the damage. One wire snapped clean, the rest frayed like a bedraggled spider's web. You fuse new wire to the old, weaving each strand through the wooden frame with the precision of a surgeon stitching a wound. The lamp's flicker makes each wire gleam. When you're done, she inspects your work, nods sagely, and gifts you a flask of her best rancid oil, an oddly appreciated lubricant for tomorrow's machines. No sooner does she depart than the reeve returns, again. This time he needs a padlock for his chest of tax receipts. You heft an iron block, cut it to size, drill holes with your awl, and carve a crude key. The lock's mechanism is simple. Wedge two metal plates together and hope rust doesn't conspire against you. You temper the assembly in oil, fit the key, and test it. A satisfying click resonates through the metal. The reeve admires your handiwork, slipping the key into his pocket before slipping you another coin. You watch him hobble off, locking secrets away, and wonder whose sins you're really forging tonight. Your apprentice peeks around the corner, eyes wide with admiration. "Master, may I strike the final blow?" he asks, voice trembling with excitement or fear. You nod and hand him a tiny horseshoe, blank left over from yesterday's orders. He hefts the hammer, raises it high, and brings it down with all his might. Sparks shower like confetti, and the horseshoe's curve sings with completion. You clap him on the shoulder, pride swelling, and remind him that every spark carries the weight of both creation and destruction. He grins, his face illuminated by the dying embers of the forge, and you see in him the echo of your own first day at the anvil. A low rumble drifts in from the neighboring barnyard, the thieves of silence, gobbling down the spare horseshoes you left behind. You sprint across the yard, wrestle a pig off a wooden box, and chase the culprit into the mud. By the time you reclaim your iron plates, you're caked in filth and exasperation. The pig snorts triumphantly before bolting into a trough. You shake your fist at its tail and vow a clause in your next contract about livestock liability. Such is medieval entrepreneurship, a delicate dance between commerce and chaos. Night deepens and you return to the forge for one last flicker of heat. You stoke the coals, just enough to kiss the edges of a copper goblet requested by the Lord Steward. With delicate blows, you shape the cup's body, coaxing it into a gaudy chalice that's both decorative and uncomfortable to hold. You etch simple scrollwork along the rim, florid lines meant to disguise your impatience. When you're satisfied, you quench it in oil, polish until it gleams like a firefly, and tuck it into a cloth. This chalice will grace banquet tables and bleed wine into royal robes. You hope it proves sturdier than your own patience. By lantern light, you sweep the workshop floor, gathering metal shavings into a scrap bucket destined for the next forge. You align tools on the bench, tongs gleaming, hammers poised, files laid like soldiers. Each instrument bears the patina of labor. dents, scratches, and the occasional fleck of baked-on forge skill. You whisper thanks to each, no, to all, knowing that absent their partnership, you'd merely be stubborn flesh against unyielding iron. Your stomach grumbles, proof that you're still more beast than artisan. You grab a wedge of cheese and a crust of bread, eating cold and alone in the quiet of night. You wash it down with water spooned from your workshop trough, the same water you'd risk for a loaf of bread in a pinch. Each bite tastes of dust and triumph, the rough poetry of a craftsman's dinner. A gentle breeze carries the scent of midnight blossoms and distant smoke. You step outside, lean against the workshop door, and gaze at the sky. Stars puncture the darkness, each one a silent witness to centuries of smithies lighting the horizon. You inhale deeply, filling your lungs with the nocturnal world, soft, mysterious, and free of contracts. For a moment, you're not bound to hammer, anvil, or forge. You're simply a man beneath a canopy of eternity. Tomorrow the cycle will repeat. Dawn, fire, metal, sweat, repeat. But tonight, you savor this fleeting respite. You unlace your leather boots, peel off your soot-stained tunic, and fold it carefully, knowing you'll don it again at first light. You press your forehead to the wooden door, closing out the world of steel and flame, and ready yourself for deep, untroubled sleep. As you drift to your hut, the village lies hushed, torches sputtering like drooping flowers. The alehouses have shuttered, and only the lonely howl of a watchdog pierces the calm. You slip beneath your ragged covers, bones anchored in the memory of the day's hammer strikes. You dream of glowing metal dancing under your hammer, of sparks rising like phoenix wings, and of blades forged true in the heart of your workshop. And in that dream, you're not exhausted, you're exalted, because for all its brutality, a medieval blacksmith's life is a testament to transformation. Raw ore into shining steel, sweat into coin, day into memory. When dawn arrives, you'll awaken to the same roar of the forge, ready to breathe fire into this world once more. But for now, sleep claims you, its silence a balm for your aching limbs and a promise that even the hardest steel can rest.
Have you ever had a job so precarious, so exhausting, so wildly humiliating, that if you slipped up once you could be beaten, starved, or launched into a moat for not being funny enough? No? Well, welcome to the sparkling nightmare of being a medieval jester. Let's say you're born with a lazy eye, a club foot, and a questionable grasp of personal boundaries. In medieval Europe, this doesn't necessarily make you an outcast. No, it makes you employable. Because in a world full of plague, war, and unripe turnips, kings and barons were desperate for laughs. And if you were weird enough, clever enough, or simply loud enough, you might just land yourself the most ridiculous and dangerous gig in the castle, court jester. Your job? To be funny. Constantly. Hilariously. On demand? Whether you've slept or not, whether you're sick or hungover, whether the Lord's favorite hunting dog just died or the Queen discovered your lewd limerick about her ankles. You are the royal stress ball. A living meme. A one-person sitcom in a world that hasn't yet invented soap. At sunrise, while the cooks are butchering meat and the knights are polishing armor, you're already planning your jokes. Because jests, contrary to popular belief, don't just fall from the heavens like divine giggles. No. You study your audience. Lord Everard finds flatulence hysterical. Lady Constance does not. The steward laughs only at jokes involving wine, goats, and poor dental hygiene. And the Chamberlain? He hasn't laughed since the famine of '38. So you mix your material. A little slapstick here, a bawdy pun there, maybe a limerick about a leper who married a goose. You juggle turnips. You balance a candle on your nose. You wear shoes curled so dramatically they qualify as medieval punctuation marks. And yes, you wear the hat, three-pronged, belled, and humiliating, because what better way to remind everyone of your status than to turn your skull into a wearable punchline? Now, jesters weren't always low-born. Some were educated, multilingual, even sharp-tongued political satirists. But don't get too cozy with the idea of dignity. Because if your joke bombed, or worse, offended, you could be punished just like any serf caught stealing grain. There are records of jesters being beaten, imprisoned, or even executed for pushing their luck. Imagine doing 5 minutes of tight comedy in front of the king, and ending up in the stocks with a carrot in your mouth. Still, you had one rare power no one else in court did: you could speak the truth. Within reason. If the tax policies were idiotic, the court feared rebellion, or the queen's new dress made her look like a stuffed swan, no one could say it, except you. Jesters were like human pressure valves. You vented the nonsense of court life through jokes and jabs. You were the only one allowed to mock authority, just as long as it was funny, and timely, and not too true. And the king hadn't just stubbed his toe, or lost a battle, or spilled gravy. Let's talk meals. As the jester, you didn't eat with the nobles, unless they wanted to show off their pet fool to visiting dignitaries. You'd sit at a small stool near the dais, just close enough to hear whispered gossip, but far enough to be kicked if you interrupted. During the feast, you'd entertain between courses, mimic a monk praying over sausages, impersonate a drunk knight attempting Latin, or juggle apples while singing obscene rhymes about tax collectors. And if the court laughed, you ate well, perhaps some roast venison or a meat pie not entirely made of pigeons. If they didn't laugh, hope you liked broth and regret. You also performed in the great hall, the courtyard, even the bathhouse if the nobles were drunk enough to find that amusing. You played lute, tambourine, or a crude pipe that sounded like a weasel being strangled. You danced jigs that left your knees screaming. You sang songs of battle and lust, always walking the tightrope between hilarious and heretical. But the hardest part wasn't the performance, it was surviving the politics. Because nothing in a medieval castle was simple. Lady Eleanor hated Lord Balthazar, who was secretly sleeping with the cook, who once burned the bishop's favorite pottage, which led to a fasting decree that made the steward faint. And your jokes? They could become weapons. You once teased the herald for his lice-ridden wig. Now he's whispering to the scribe that you made fun of the bishop's tonsure. Tomorrow, you might find yourself relocated to a less forgiving court in the north, known for its fondness for public hangings and turnip festivals. And yet, somehow, you're still here, still performing. Because jesters, for all their absurdity, were valuable. You kept the nobles entertained. You distracted them from disease, famine, and the soul-crushing boredom of castle life. You turned their misfortunes into laughter, their crimes into verse, their idiocy into satire. You were the medieval therapist with bells on your head and a sharp tongue in your mouth. But even jesters need respite. At the end of the night, after the laughter dies and the fire gutters low, you stumble to your cot, a straw-filled sack in a cold room near the kennels. Your feet ache, your voice is hoarse, and your jaw hurts from smiling too long. You lie there, staring at the wooden beams, wondering if tomorrow you'll be the joke, or the jester who goes too far. Because in the end, being a jester wasn't just a job. It was survival. In a world where silence was deadly and honesty fatal, laughter, carefully shaped, expertly timed, was your only armor. And as you drift to sleep, you think of your best joke of the day. The one that made the lady-in-waiting snort wine through her nose and the steward mutter blasphemies under his breath. That right there is victory. And you pray that tomorrow, the court still wants to laugh. Morning comes not with a gentle yawn, but with the thunderous boom of a chamberlain banging a staff against the stone hallway. You bolt upright, mouth dry, head pounding, not from drink, but from last night's command performance where you made the Duchess laugh so hard she choked on a walnut. She survived, but now insists you open every feast with that bit about the goose and the bishop's codpiece. Congratulations, you've become a human party trick. You haul yourself out of your straw mattress, tug on yesterday's tights, which smell like boiled onions and anxiety, and fumble for your hat. One of the bells is missing. Again. Probably stolen by a page boo. You make a mental note to find him and accidentally trip him into a trough later. Your first stop of the day isn't the feast hall or the garden. It's the solar, the private lounge of Lady Marjorie, who's requested a Light morning performance, to ease the royal hangover. The court physician tried leeches, but apparently your lewd puppet show works better. You arrive half-dressed, barely coherent, and are immediately thrust into the world's most awkward private audience, four noblewomen draped in velvets, sipping spiced wine, judging you like meat at market. You perform the classics. A jig. A limerick. A short play involving 2 socks, a bit of ash, and a crude impersonation of the bishop's nightly confessions. The ladies titter behind fans, though one nearly gags into her goblet. Success. You're rewarded with a few copper coins and a stale sweetbread that smells faintly of rat. Still, food is food, and your teeth are strong enough, mostly. After the performance, you duck into the garderobe for a moment of privacy. The castle's lavatory is little more than a vertical shaft of terror, but you need the quiet. Because in 30 minutes you're expected in the throne room. And today isn't just another day of casual mockery. Today, the king has guests. Foreign guests. From Aquitaine. And that means diplomacy. And that means you. Because nothing says stable political alliance like humiliating your own nobility in front of strangers. You're not sure if it's genius or madness, probably both, but the court has decided that your jests, your puns, your foolery will act as the soft, absurd glue that bonds nations. You, a man who once juggled pickled eggs while reciting love poetry in a bathtub, are now a tool of international strategy. You rehearse on the way. You can't mention the Duke's foot fungus. Avoid jokes about frogs. And whatever you do, do not mock their bishop. He's got more political power than your entire village. The throne room is already packed when you arrive. Lords, ladies, knights in ceremonial armor that looks like it could fold in a stiff breeze. The king is seated on his glorified wooden chair, wearing an expression that says, "I've had constipation less uncomfortable than this." The Aquitanians sit stiffly, pretending not to notice the draft whistling through the broken stained glass. Then comes your cue. The herald announces you like a knight. Sir Fool of the shimmering wit, keeper of the king's laughter, master of mirth and occasional flatulence. You enter. Trip on your own shoe. Land flat on your face. The room gasps. You pop up, slap yourself theatrically, and shout, "Fear not! My head is the only part of me too soft to bruise." Laughter. Real, unscripted, glorious laughter. You move through your set like a minstrel on fire. You insult a local baron's haircut. It was dreadful. You imitate the court dog chasing his own tail. You do a brief puppet reenactment of the last failed crusade. The sock puppet version includes a camel and a weeping monk. The Aquitanians chuckle. The king chuckles. The queen, stone-faced as usual, raises one eyebrow. You are, by all medieval metrics, killing it. But then, disaster. You make a joke about the foreign envoy's accent. Just a small one. A clever pun involving cheese, siege, and pigeons. But the hall falls quiet. Dead quiet. You've crossed the line. The envoy's face is beet red. The king stares at you like you've just defecated on the family crest. You swallow. Hard. You bow, deeply, and pivot into a completely unrelated bit involving your impression of a sheep with gout. Slowly, mercifully, the laughter returns. The moment passes. You live to just another hour. Afterward, you're summoned privately by the steward. You expect a flogging, or exile, or to be handed a shovel and sent to tend the moat, breed, dig your own grave. Instead, he claps you on the back, chuckling. Brave, he says. Suicidal, but brave. His Grace appreciates your daring. Just try not to make jokes about pigeons again. You nod, heart still hammering, and escape to the kitchens for a crust of bread and a moment to breathe. But the day isn't over. You've been summoned to the nursery. The royal brats are bored, and apparently no one else can keep them from setting the tapestries on fire. You arrive to find 3 small nobles in training hurling figs at a servant. You're pelted with 2 before you say a word. "New game!" you declare, snatching up a spoon and balancing it on your nose. They shriek with laughter. You teach them to juggle turnips. You act out. The cow who married a wizard, complete with a farting broomstick. You distract them long enough for the nurse to sneak in and drug their milk with sleep herbs. As they drift off, one murmurs, "You're funny, even if you smell." Praise from royalty. You collapse outside the nursery, exhausted beyond belief. You've performed 6 times today. You've avoided international conflict, calmed a child uprising, and only mildly offended the bishop's cousin. Still, as the torches are lit and evening falls over the castle, you know your work isn't done. Because tonight there's a feast. And you, dear Jester, are the evening's main entertainment. Night at the castle isn't quiet. It's louder, smellier, and infinitely more dangerous. The feast is in full swing, and you, dressed in what amounts to a patchwork crime against fashion, are standing in the shadows near the minstrels, waiting to be beckoned like a housecat in bells. You're tired, your feet hurt, and the smell of roasted boar makes your stomach growl like a medieval washing machine. But you're not here to eat. You're here to perform. The high table is packed with nobility in varying stages of wine-soaked self-destruction. The lord is on his 4th goblet, and already slurring his vowels. The baroness is attempting to flirt with a knight 20 years her junior by feeding him pickled turnips. Somewhere in the back, a minstrel is quietly vomiting into a lute case. This is your crowd. Your name is called, technically shouted by a drunken steward, and you bound into the hall. You trip over a dog. Intentional? Maybe. The dog seems unfazed. The guests cheer. You somersault, do a jig, and leap onto the trestle table, narrowly avoiding the gravy boat. "Lords and ladies," you cry, "I bring you laughter, lechery, and low standards, just like your last wedding." The room erupts. You perform your hits. The mock fencing routine with 2 ladles. The monologue about fleas and chastity belts. The interpretive dance about the plague, grim, but somehow hilarious when you use a dead goose as a prop. The crowd laps it up. Midway through, the Duke's son, whose face has all the charm of a bruised cabbage, challenges you. "Make fun of me," he says, already red-cheeked from wine and arrogance. Dangerous territory. You smile, do a quick calculation, and say, "I would, my lord, but I've been instructed not to punch down." Gasps. Laughter. A few servants audibly choke on their stew. The Duke's son turns crimson. For a moment, you think you're about to be flung out a window. But then, the Duke himself bursts into a wheezing fit of laughter that might also be a heart attack. You're safe. For now. A roast is brought out, entire pig, mouth stuffed with apples, teeth like a villain in a bard's tale. You're handed a chunk and a half-empty goblet of spiced wine. You eat standing up, like a raccoon at a banquet. You've earned it. But the night isn't over. "Something dramatic!" someone shouts. Of course. You launch into your famed performance, the tragedy of Sir Codswallop the Flatulent, a tale of doomed love, lost honor, and excessive beans. It ends with you pretending to die dramatically in the Lord's lap, knocking over a jug of wine and soaking his lap in red. He bellows with laughter, or outrage. You honestly can't tell anymore. But the crowd loves it. And when the final toast is raised, it's to you. "To the fool who speaks truth in jest and lives to mock again." You bow too deeply, and nearly fall off the table. After the feast, the cleanup begins. Not for you. That's servant work. Your job now is to navigate post-feast politics. Because nobles drunk on mead and flattery get ideas. Lady Margwyn corners you by the torchlight. "You should come perform in my manor," she slurs. "I'll pay you in furs. And jam." You thank her and sidestep the offer like it's a dungeon invitation. Then the bishop's aide slides up, scowling. You made a heretical joke about monks kissing sheep. I said the sheep consented. You whisper back. He's not amused. You might have just earned yourself a visit from the Inquisition's junior apprentice. You retreat to the outer bailey, exhausted. The stars are out, the sky calm, but your head is spinning. Being a jester isn't just about being funny. It's being the social lubricant in a medieval machine made entirely of ego, wine, and repressed trauma. You think about the castle's other fools, the ones who didn't make it. The ones too bold, too bitter, too drunk, or just not funny enough. You remember one who juggled knives to impress a visiting count and left with 3 fewer fingers. Another who impersonated a friar and was pelted with stale bread until he cried. No one remembers their names. And you? You're still here. By sheer wit, timing, and the ability to turn humiliation into applause, you've outlasted a dozen others. You've turned your status, lower than the scullery rat, into something powerful, if temporary. Because laughter, in this world of backstabbing and plague, is rarer than gold. And when you deliver it, you are briefly untouchable. You head to your quarters. It's technically a broom closet, but you've turned it into something resembling a nest. A few cushions, a blanket stolen from the laundry, and a box of performance odds and ends, a bent tambourine, a puppet with one eye, and the rubber nose you wear when impersonating the reeve. You curl up on the straw mat, sore, full, and still humming the court's favorite lewd ballad. Another day survived. Another performance done. You close your eyes, dreaming of a world where fools are paid in gold, not crusts of bread and near-death experiences. In the dark you smile. Because tomorrow, you'll do it all again. Dawn returns like a slap from a glove noble, sudden, smug, and unwelcome. You wake to the sound of hooves clattering through the courtyard and a servant yelling about spilled goose grease. Your back aches. Your hat is mysteriously damp. Your mouth tastes like someone poured a candle down your throat. Another glorious morning in the life of the royal fool. You sit up in your nest of straw, furs, and shame, mentally preparing for another performance marathon. But today is different. The steward greets you not with an insult or a request for fart jokes, but with a parchment. Sealed. Stamped. Important looking. The king wants a private audience, he says. Your stomach flips. This is never good. The last time the king wanted a private audience, the jester before you was sent on a diplomatic mission to distract a French ambush. With juggling. He didn't come back. Still, you slap on your bells, rinse your face with goat bucket water, and march to the king's solar like a condemned man in slippers. The room is dim. The king sits in a heavy chair by the fire, staring into the flames like a man composing his last will or planning a particularly nasty practical joke. He waves you in without looking. You've made quite the stir, he says. Is that good? You venture. He turns to you slowly. You make them laugh. Even when they shouldn't. Especially when they shouldn't. That's power. Dangerous power. You try to smile. It doesn't stick. I need someone who can listen without being noticed. The king continues. Someone who knows what everyone thinks but says nothing that matters. You're invisible. People talk around you. You hear things. I need to hear them too. You blink. He wants to make you a royal informant. A spy. A jester-shaped tapeworm in the gut of court politics. He pours 2 cups of wine. 1 cup for laughter, he says, handing you one. And 1 for loyalty. You drink. What else are you going to do? Say no. Get reassigned to entertain the troops on the Welsh border where jokes are paid in bruises. So now, on top of dancing, jesting, and juggling bodily fluids, you're expected to eavesdrop. Spy. Listen. Report. And somehow still make the queen laugh when she's in mourning for her 6th dog. The next few days blur into chaos. You dance at a wedding where the groom vomits into the bride's veil. You sing at a funeral for a baron who allegedly fell on his sword. with help. You are asked to perform a shadow puppet reenactment of a heretic burning. You improvise. Badly. The puppet gets stuck in the fire. The nobles are amused. The clergy are less so. Meanwhile, your spy work begins. You linger in doorways. Pretend to sleep on benches. Play the lute very badly outside closed doors while noblemen plot and whisper. You learn who's secretly in debt, who's betting the stable boy, who's plotting against the crown, and who still thinks leeches cure everything. You deliver all of it, carefully, selectively, to the king. You dress it up in rhyme and jest, cloak it in humor, bury the blade in laughter. You watch as courtiers rise and fall, as alliances shift, as one particularly smug knight volunteers for a crusade he definitely wasn't planning. You wonder, is this still jesting? Or have you become something else? The line blurs further. You're called to perform during a siege. The enemy is at the gates, flaming arrows in the sky, and the nobles are drunk and terrified. You juggle torches to distract from the burning stables. You deliver a monologue titled Why Dying in a Castle is Slightly More Dignified Than in a Ditch. The steward laughs so hard he drops his goblet. The soldiers, oddly, take heart. You realize you're doing more than performing now. You're holding this mad, groaning mess of a world together with puns, pratfalls, and thinly veiled sarcasm. After the siege is lifted, you're gifted a cloak. Real wool. No lice. It's the finest thing you've ever owned. You wear it like armor. But not everyone's a fan. The bishop corners you in the chapel, eyes sharp, fingers twitching near his incense. You laugh too freely. He hisses. There's a reason the Lord never giggled. You reply. Perhaps he would have, if he'd had better company. You're slapped. Hard. Your ear rings for days. But the next time the bishop tries to condemn a beggar to the stocks, you perform a blistering song about holy hypocrisy that gets 3 encores and a mild heresy investigation. Then, one night, everything changes. The queen falls ill. Real illness. The kind no tincture or prayer fixes. The castle goes quiet. The jests stop. You're not called. For a week you practice in silence. You fear you're no longer needed. But one morning the nursemaid finds you. The queen has asked for you. Specifically. You enter her chambers expecting grief, wailing, some tearful request for a final laugh. Instead, she smiles weakly and says, Tell me that story. The one about the knight who married his horse. You sit by her bedside and tell it. Every absurd detail. Every hoofed honeymoon. Every ridiculous joke. She laughs, quietly, wheezily, but real. Then she asks for another. And another. By dawn, she's asleep, face peaceful for the first time in days. You realize something. In this broken, brutal world, laughter isn't just a distraction. It's medicine. Shield. Rebellion. A tiny, glittering form of grace. When she dies a week later, the king doesn't speak for a day. Then he calls you in, looks at you with red-rimmed eyes, and says simply, Thank you? No joke. No title. Just thanks. You nod and leave quietly. Your hat bells don't even jingle. You're still the jester. But now they see you differently. Not just as a clown, but as something essential. Someone who held the mirror up to madness, laughed at it, and dared everyone else to laugh too. You still perform, of course. You still dance, juggle, trip over dogs, and write questionable limericks about friars. But you know now what your real role is. You are the fool. The holy fool. The one who speaks truth wrapped in nonsense. And in a world ruled by cruelty, disease, greed, and bad wine, that truth is the only thing keeping them human. So you keep going. You jest until your voice cracks. You laugh until your ribs ache. Because someone has to. And it might as well be you. Imagine waking up one morning to the sound of 1,000 drums, the smell of burning animal fat, and the sight of a towering wall of wood rolling toward your home, all because your lord insulted someone's banner designed 20 years ago. Welcome to the glorious, gruesome, endlessly stupid chaos of medieval siege warfare, where survival depended on who could throw a diseased cow farther. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. So, let's set the scene. It's the 12th century. You're a peasant. You've just finished red hatching your roof with straw you don't own. The harvest failed. Again. Your neighbor has lice. Again. And then someone on a very large horse rides up and announces that your castle is under siege. Wonderful. The reasons for the siege are, as always, vague and absurd. Maybe a duke wants his cousin's lands. Maybe a baron's wife ran off with a jungler. Maybe someone didn't pay their tithes and now the Pope is fuming in Latin. Doesn't matter. You live in the wrong place at the wrong time, which in medieval Europe is basically always. The attacking army arrives like bad weather. Slowly. Loudly. Covered in rust. There's shouting, banners, endless wagons filled with pointy sticks, and a surprising number of goats. You peer over the battlements and realize you're about to spend the next several months being pelted with rocks, insults, and possibly plague meat. Welcome to the siege. Let's talk about why siege warfare happened in the first place. Unlike Hollywood, most medieval battles didn't take place on open fields with dramatic charges and stirring speeches. Those were expensive. Unpredictable. You could actually die in those. Far easier to just surround a castle, starve everyone inside, and wait for dysentery to do the heavy lifting. And that castle? It's not just a fancy rock with flags. It's the medieval version of a panic room, tax office, war bunker, and family reunion center all in one. It's where the Lord lives, where the food is stored, where the villagers flee, and where you now have to sleep next to 3 pigs and a guy who collects teeth. From the moment the siege begins, time becomes your worst enemy. You're on the inside. Resources are limited. Every mouth is a liability. You ration bread that's more weevil than wheat. Water starts tasting suspiciously like moldy soup. The air smells like fear, sweat, and boiled cabbage. Within a week, someone suggests eating the horses. By week 2, the horses are gone and someone's eyeing the pigeons. Meanwhile, the attackers are outside building what can only be described as war IKEA, a collection of siege engines, ladders, towers, and platforms that somehow always come with missing instructions and an angry French engineer yelling about torque. They start with the basics: battering rams, big logs on wheels with a furry hood to protect the guys swinging it. That's right. Medieval warfare involved men hiding under cowhide, bashing walls, and hoping no one drops a boiling pot of surprise on their heads. Let's not forget the ladders. Oh yes, the humble ladder. If you've ever climbed one to paint a house, imagine doing that while arrows rain down on you, boiling oil sizzles around your feet, and someone above is trying to crush your skull with a brick. Scaling ladders during a siege was basically medieval suicide with steps. Still, they used them. Repeatedly. Because nothing says great strategy like sending hundreds of men up a vertical death trap shouting, "For honor!" Inside the walls, it's panic, triage, and very bad hygiene. The Lord's trying to look composed, but you've seen him cry into a goose. The steward is hoarding onions. The priest is praying for rain and maybe a better life next time. You're trying not to die. Or eat your boots. Again. But then, just when you think it can't get worse, they bring out the trebuchet. Now, let's be clear, trebuchets are insane. They are medieval science fiction. Giant wooden arms powered by physics and spite, designed to fling 300-pound rocks, dead animals, barrels of waste, or anything unpleasant across vast distances. The first time you see a trebuchet in action, you're not sure whether to applaud or scream. It winds up with the dramatic creak of doom, then thwack. A payload of death arcs across the sky and smashes into the outer wall like God playing baseball. These things didn't just break walls. They broke spirits. They hurled messages, literal ones sometimes, written on sheep skins or etched onto cow skulls, saying things like, "Surrender now," or, "Your mom's stew is bad." Psychological warfare, medieval style. But even the trebuchet has its flaws. It takes time to build. It needs skilled engineers. And the counterweights, sometimes made of lead, sometimes stones, occasionally peasants who've made career-limiting comments, have to be precise. One bad calculation and your 300-pound rock ends up flattening your own tent. Back inside the castle, morale is nosediving. Food's low. Hope's lower. You're boiling leather shoes for broth. The rats are starting to look delicious. Disease spreads like wildfire in a haystack. A quarter of the garrison is coughing. Half the children have lice. And someone definitely just died in the well. But you hold out. Because surrender means humiliation. And if you're lucky, only some light pillaging. If you're unlucky, it's mass execution and your head on a spike as a warning to the next village that thinks about ignoring a demand for tribute. So you resist. You repair walls. You throw rocks. You dump waste on anyone who gets close. You use fire arrows, boiling pitch, and crossbows that snap your fingers if you're not careful. You pray. A lot. You bribe saints. You swear oaths. You tell yourself that help is coming. But here's the dirty truth. Help is almost never coming. Sieges are long. Boring. Starvation-filled. If your lord doesn't have powerful friends, or owes too many debts, no one's riding in with banners and fanfare. You're on your own. With moldy bread and trebuchet-flung plague pigs for company. And sometimes, when everything seems lost, there's a miracle. The enemy gets tired. Supplies run out. Morale drops. Someone important catches dysentery. Or they realize there's nothing left inside the castle but fleas and disappointment. And they leave. They just pack up and go. Maybe they got bored. Maybe they got paid. Maybe they just didn't want to be remembered as the guys who died trying to capture a castle with no roof. So the siege ends. And what's left? A castle full of corpses, half a well you'll never trust again, and peasants traumatized into the next century. You emerge from the ruins blinking like moles, trying to rebuild, repopulate, and remember which part of the pig is still edible. And the worst part? You know it'll happen again. Because in the medieval world, war wasn't an event. It was a season. The army has moved on, the banners are gone, and the moats are full of things no one wants to talk about. You've survived a siege. Congratulations. Your reward? A collapsed roof, 10 fewer neighbors, and the knowledge that you now fear cows flying through the air. But let's not rest just yet. Because as with all great medieval horrors, the siege was just the beginning. Let's rewind and look deeper, not just at what it was like inside the castle, but what it took to plan and execute one of these marvels of mayhem. Because sieges weren't just about catapults and angry yelling. They were bureaucratic nightmares with sharp edges. First, let's talk about logistics. You can't just wake up, gather a few guys with pitchforks, and storm a castle. A proper siege requires preparation. Months of it. Food supplies, carpenters, engineers, blacksmiths, masons, scribes, cooks, priests, and a suspicious number of chickens all had to come with you. This was war on a diet of salted meat, hard biscuits, and the creeping realization that no one remembered to pack toilet paper. You needed siege engineers, the nerds of medieval warfare. These were men who could calculate weight, tension, and trajectory while wearing 12 layers of wool and avoiding arrows. Without them, you had nothing but a bunch of angry guys yelling at a wall. They draw up plans for siege towers, massive wooden boxes taller than the walls they'd soon be shoved against. Inside were ladders, platforms, and space for soldiers to huddle together and rethink their career choices. Moving them required teams of oxen, human labor, and the occasional human sacrifice, not officially, but morale was low. If the tower got stuck in the mud, it became a glorified watch post, or target practice for flaming arrows. Next came the sappers, medieval miners with zero regard for life expectancy. These brave, filthy souls dug tunnels under castle walls, hoping to collapse them. And by dig, we mean crawl on hands and knees through darkness, mud, and filth, supported by wooden beams that groaned like a constipated ogre. If the defenders caught wind of it, they'd dig countermines, tunnels meant to intercept and trap the enemy miners underground in what amounts to medieval whack-a-mole, but with actual murder. Then you've got battering rams, as blunt and brutish as they sound. Big logs, sometimes metal-tipped, swung repeatedly at castle gates until something gave, usually the door or your own shoulder. To protect the guys swinging the ram, they'd build a ram house, essentially a roofed wagon covered in wet hides to stop it from catching fire. Didn't always work. Wet cow roof is not exactly flame-retardant science. If brute force didn't work, you tried psychological warfare. The classics included catapulting the heads of messengers or loved ones over the wall, tossing diseased animals or, if you were really creative, human poop into the enemy's wells, loudly reading fake letters suggesting the castle had already been betrayed, playing loud instruments at night to deprive the defenders of sleep. This, unfortunately, often included bagpipes. Meanwhile, inside the castle, people were developing stress-induced tics and a love-hate relationship with pickled turnips. The Lord had stopped pretending he knew what he was doing. The steward was aging in dog years. Everyone was either praying, panicking, or pretending not to have worms. There were also the defenders' tricks. They weren't just sitting there hoping for a miracle. They got creative. If you approached with siege ladders, they'd throw lime, the chemical, not the fruit, down at you to blind and burn. If you climbed the walls, they'd drop rocks, boiling water, boiling oil, or if they were running low, just sewage. The castle wasn't just a fort, it was a multi-level death trap. Let's not forget the brattices, wooden extensions built over the edge of the wall, allowing defenders to drop nastiness directly downward. Think of them as ancient murder balconies. Charming! Eventually, though, every siege reaches a moment of truth. Either the attackers break through, or the defenders give up. This leads to one of three outcomes, all of them medieval nightmares. Negotiated surrender. The defenders open the gates in exchange for mercy. What mercy means, of course, is open to interpretation. Sometimes it's, "We'll only loot the treasury." Sometimes it's, "We'll only kill half of you." Assault and sack. The attackers finally break in, and now it's a free-for-all. Killing, looting, burning. Women and children? They're either spared or sold, depending on the mood. Religious buildings? Ransacked. Food stores? Gone. Dogs? Don't ask. If you survived a sack, you didn't forget it. Starvation surrender. The slow, miserable death where everyone gets so hungry they either eat each other, eat leather, or eat dirt. You opened the gates because dying with dignity went out the window around the time you started seasoning rat meat with candle wax. Once the siege ended, the rebuilding began. And it was ugly. Rotting corpses, burned out huts, and livestock traumatized beyond milk production. Disease often followed victory like an uninvited uncle. Dysentery, plague, fever, war's little bonus round. For the soldiers, surviving the siege meant looting, drinking, and occasionally being knighted if they hadn't accidentally stabbed someone important. For the engineers and craftsmen, it meant immediate conscription to the next siege, because guess what? There's always another one. Sieges weren't isolated events. They were a lifestyle. A system. A constant background threat to medieval life like rain, famine, or bishops with grudges. So next time you hear someone romanticize castles and chivalry, remind them that for every fairy tale tower, there was a trebuchet aimed at it, hurling cow corpses and despair. Because in the end, medieval siege warfare wasn't about glory or valor. It was about who ran out of bread first. Let's talk about what it was like to be the poor, unfortunate soul actually participating in a medieval siege. Not as a noble general making grand hand gestures from a velvet tent. Not as the king's cousin pretending to be brave in polished armor. No, we're talking about you. The common soldier, conscripted peasant, or expendable townsfolk turned wall fodder trying to survive in the nastiest game of wait and die ever invented. Congratulations. You've been drafted. You didn't ask for this. One day, you're trying to make a shoe out of pig intestine. The next, your lord rides into town and tells you it's time to fight for honor, glory, and his ongoing dispute over a muddy field he claims belonged to his grandmother's favorite goat. You're handed a rusty spear, half a boiled onion, and told to march toward a castle you've never heard of. Welcome to the siege line. Life here is miserable. There's no better word. You sleep on the ground, if you're lucky. Mud if you're not. Your armor doesn't fit, your boots are soup, and your helmet smells like the last guy who died in it. There are fleas. So many fleas. You quickly learn to distinguish between battle lice and tent lice, like some kind of grim zoologist. Your job? It changes daily. Some days you dig ditches. Other days you throw logs into a pit, push carts full of rubble, or haul rocks that will eventually be catapulted into someone else's ceiling. If you're really lucky, you're chosen for ladder duty, which means you'll be among the first sent running straight into a wall while arrows turn your body into a living pincushion. They don't tell you that part when they hand you the ladder. Food is a nightmare. Rations consist of salted meat so tough it could be used as a weapon, bread that doubles as roofing tile, water that may or may not have a dead rat floating in it. If you're caught stealing from the stores, you're flogged. If you're caught eating your shoe, they might just promote you. And don't even get started on the sanitation. The trench is your toilet, bath, and, if things go poorly, your grave. Disease spreads like rumors in a monastery. Dysentery is so common it has a nickname. The backdoor plague. You start to believe that half of siege casualties come from bathroom mishaps. At night, the fun continues. You'd think you'd sleep well from sheer exhaustion. But no. There's screaming, drunken brawls, howling dogs, priests mumbling through their 400th rosary, and the occasional flaming rock flung by the defenders as a bedtime gift. Sleep is optional. Nightmares are included. Now imagine you're inside the castle instead. Things aren't better there, just different. You're behind walls, yes, but they're slowly crumbling. You're stuck in a stone prison with a few hundred of your closest, increasingly smellier neighbors. The food is running out, water is turning green, and someone just boiled a boot for soup again. There's tension. Everywhere. Every step creaks with desperation. The Lord tries to keep morale up by giving speeches about heroism and eternal glory. No one listens. You're too busy counting how many weeks it would take to die from chewing on your belt. In the Great Hall, the noble family still eats, separately of course, but with fewer and fewer courses. Where once there were platters of roast, now there's thin broth, garnished with regret. The servants are either too hungry to care or too dead to serve. The dog has disappeared. No one talks about it. And the smell. The castle was never fresh. But now it's apocalyptic. Sweaty men in armor. Mildew. Unwashed clothes. Latrines overflowing. You start to hallucinate scented herbs. But let's say, by some dark twist of fate, you survive long enough to experience the chaos of the final assault. This is when the enemy decides they're done with waiting and want to end things in a glorious, bloody rush. Everyone knows it's coming. The attackers spend days preparing siege towers, those wheeled monstrosities that look like outhouses for giants. Inside, screaming men, crossbows, and death. You watch from the ramparts as they creak toward your walls, slowly, ominously, as drums beat and banners wave and everyone around you either prays or vomits. Then it happens. Arrows fly. Ladders slam against the stone. Men scream as they scramble up, slipping in blood and soot. You dump boiling pitch, rocks, and everything else that isn't nailed down, including, in one case, the castle's only chair. If they breach the gate, it's over. The inner yard turns into a slaughterhouse. You fight because there's no choice. There's no retreat, no mercy. You swing your weapon, scream, and pray not to fall. You see faces twisted in terror, eyes wide with rage or pain. The butcher's boy next to you takes a sword to the chest. He was 12. And somehow, miraculously, your side holds. Or doesn't. Let's say you're victorious. The enemy retreats, licking their wounds. You stagger through the bodies, stunned. You find your friend, missing an ear but alive. You sit on a crate and weep, not out of sadness, but sheer exhaustion. You've survived the worst of it. You think. Because then comes the aftermath. No one talks about this part. The cleanup. The disease. The rats. The rebuilding that never truly rebuilds. The family you buried in the orchard. The nightmares. The silence that follows a siege. The kind that creeps in and settles under your skin. Victory in siege warfare often feels exactly like defeat, but with more paperwork. And if you were on the attacking side? Well, guess what? You're off to the next siege. Because war in the medieval world isn't about battles. It's about endurance. It's about surviving 1,000 quiet horrors before the first sword is drawn. And somehow, waking up the next morning, eating moldy bread, and doing it all over again. That's siege warfare. Not knights in shining armor. Just dirt. And fire. And the slow grind of madness. So you've made it. Somehow, despite flaming arrows, collapsing walls, dysentery, and possibly a trebuchet-launched cow flying directly at your face, you've survived the siege. Now what? Well, now comes the truly grim part. Not the glory, not the celebration, but the slow, festering aftermath. Because the end of a siege wasn't an ending. It was just a new flavor of misery. Let's start with what happens if the castle falls. The gates are kicked in, the defenders overwhelmed, and the victors storm through the smoking rubble like ants discovering a dropped sandwich. You might think, hey, maybe they'll be merciful. Cute. That's adorable. What actually follows is a sack, a medieval euphemism for theft, violence, random murder, and very questionable behavior involving fire. No one is safe. Noble? You might get ransomed, if you're lucky. Peasant? You're just inventory. The victors loot everything not bolted to the stone, and if it is bolted, they rip the bolts out too. Chalices, tapestries, clothing, animals, food, jewelry, furniture, the door hinges, your underpants, everything goes. Monks get beaten, nuns get chased, children get stepped on, and someone tries to steal a wall. And then they burn it. No, really, they burn it. Why? Because ash doesn't rebel. Fire is final. And also, it's fun if you're the sort of person who thinks kicking over a sandcastle isn't dramatic enough. Survivors, if they're even allowed to exist, are left to rebuild their lives from the remains of roasted timber and scorched regrets. Livestock gone. Grain stores looted. Wells poisoned. Walls collapsed. Fields trampled. Hope? Evaporated. But wait, what if the defenders win? Oh, that's better, right? Sure. Except now you have to deal with the thousands of rotting corpses strewn outside your gates. Your moat is clogged with dead men arrows, and at least 3 helmets full of brains. You spend the next few weeks burying bodies, collecting weapons, and wondering what the hell to do with the captured siege tower currently doubling as a pigeon hotel. Then there's the economic fallout. The land has been ravaged. No one was planting during the siege, or harvesting, or trading. You've lost the whole season of productivity. The surviving peasants are malnourished, terrified, and possibly planning to leave forever. And who could blame them? Meanwhile, your lord, who bravely spent most of the siege in his solar drinking spiced wine and offering increasingly unhelpful suggestions, decides now's the perfect time to raise taxes to pay for the damages. You can't win. Let's not forget the mental toll. Siege survivors were not okay. How could they be? They've spent months surrounded by death, disease, fire, starvation, and bad poetry. You watched your neighbor eat his shoe. You sang hymns over a stew made from rats. You lost friends. Maybe family. You hear the creak of a trebuchet arm in your sleep. You flinch every time someone opens a door too fast. And yet, somehow, life continues. Because it has to. So you rebuild. You patch the walls. You scrape burnt flesh off the stones. You bury the nameless. You try to laugh again, eventually. You repair your thatch roof again. You try to replant your tiny, cursed field and convince your chickens to return. They won't. Chickens have excellent instincts. Meanwhile, your lord writes letters to his allies claiming a great and honorable victory. Songs are composed. Mostly inaccurate ones. You hear a minstrel sing about glory in the siege of Valancourt. You were there. There was no glory. There was vomiting and cheese theft. But the story spreads anyway. Because medieval people, much like modern ones, loved to romanticize horror, especially if they weren't the ones who had to sleep next to the latrine trench. And the irony? In a few months, or years, it could all happen again. Because while the castle may now be whole, the politics outside it never are. Lords squabble. Kings pout. Borders blur. A noble gets insulted at a feast, and suddenly 500 men are building another siege tower because someone spilled wine on a cousin's tapestry. Medieval life was an endless cycle of farm, pray, war, rebuild, repeat. So why do we remember siege warfare with such fascination? Because it's the perfect encapsulation of medieval life, brutal, absurd, hopeful, hopeless, and occasionally hilarious in the darkest way imaginable. It was theater, horrible, bloody theater, played out in stone and mud. One day you're throwing dung at invaders. The next you're picking roses where the battering ram once stood. Time moves forward. People forget. The pigeons come back. The moat gets cleaned. And eventually, new generations ask, what was it like to live through a siege? And if you're still around, you sit them down and say, well, there was this one time a knight tried to duel a goat. And the goat won. But that's another story. Because survival wasn't just about living. It was about remembering. And maybe, just maybe, laughing at the madness when the screams finally stop.